Republicans worship their base. Republicans are afraid of their base. There's a reason why you had Kevin McCarthy and the McCarthy tapes. Oh, I'm going to get Donald Trump to resign. Ooh, no, I'm not going to do that. Oh, Lindsey Graham, he should be ashamed of himself. Oh, no, I'm running from people in the airport. Like these people are beholden to their base. Why isn't the Democratic Party beholden to their base, which is, to your point earlier, Maria, Black women, people of color, BIPOC folks? Why don't they treat us with the same reverence, right? Why aren't they afraid, or better yet, why aren't they afraid of losing us in the way that Republicans are afraid of their base?
Because you have to fund the police.
I'll tee it up for you, Julio. I'll give you the two secret words that we... White supremacy.
Yeah, it's simple. One of the things that I think about the Democratic Party, and I feel like, celebrating my 25th anniversary, I'm very nostalgic for the 90s again, right? And
you're always nostalgic for the 90s. You don't need an excuse.
Okay, stop. Okay, all right. Okay, I'm also a Knicks fan, and they suck now, so that's why I'm nostalgic for the 90s. But we tend to forget how effed up the 90s really was, right? And there's this sort of like, when people talk about, the Clinton democracy, right? And the don't stop thinking about tomorrow started popping up on my feed. And you're like, we're being sold this like message of hope, right? That has been continued and that's been sort of recycled, even in a post 9/11 world where, in fact, if you look at Democratic policy from the 90s to now, how progressive and reflective of the community needs has it been, right? We got the crime bill, the
mandatory minimum,
mandatory minimum, welfare reform, code word for like
building the 1996 Bill Clinton started building the wall.
Right. And that welfare reform where it's like code word for like Black people get free shit, and we need to stop it. And it keeps going, and it got, it gets hardened after Bush, and then Obama kind of gives sort of this hope, right? Because you're like, oh my God, a non-white face. And what did Obama, in the end, like, people tend to forget, just specifically with Latinos and Latinas, people tend to forget the recession and all this. Latinos and Latinas got decimated economically with housing, with jobs,
Nevada, Florida,
and there
California.
was a lot of hope. There was a lot of hope. And then when things were really sticking, and it's like all of a sudden, like, let's make Mitt Romney look really bad. And like, I'm still here. And I think Obama's charisma, like, exposed, like, hid a lot of like what was bubbling, because he was a really, really, like, he's a candidate, right? He's a presence. But we tend to forget that throughout this entire history, there's a constant. And that constant is Senator Joe Biden, then Vice President Joe Biden, and President Joe Biden. And if we think that Joe Biden all of a sudden, from 1990 to now is going to be like, you know what? I'm going to change. America's changed. I've listened to that Maria Hinojosa. I saw her. You're absolutely right. We have to talk about representation. I love Joe, Joe Biden's a good man. And don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not here to knock Joe Biden. He reminds me of my Irish American father-in-law, God rest in peace, Bill Egan. But he's set in his ways.
The thing is that what I like to say is nothing that we are talking about that we are living through now.
Right.
None of it is a surprise to Joe Biden.
Yeah.
None of it. And if he wanted to be a consequential president.
Exactly. That's my point.
Like the way that Trump was consequential in a horrific way. But if Biden wanted to be a consequential president, disruptor, so many opportunities. I mean,
he's not, but that's the thing.
On the issue of the Border Patrol, after they came out with, horses and whips on Black people, he could have said right there, we're closing it down. Any number of places where he could have been totally revolutionary. And it's like he's afraid of doing that. And instead, we all have deep fear of what's going to happen in the midterms.
And Republicans are very, 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 very good.
They stay on message.
And they are like, we got a plan. Let's play the long game. Roe v. I mean, if you don't think like there were plans after Roe v. Wade was passed, like the ruling, like they were like, how do we get it back? And they just stick to message, and it's and what they're doing now, which is actually quite effective, because they know that at least in our community there's this distrust, because I do think there has been this sense of distrust. They're playing it now with misinformation, disinformation. Like now, hey, why are you with the distrustful Democrats? Like they've never committed their promise. Come to us. Look at this world. Look at this WhatsApp
give you a turkey.
Group.
Yeah, we'll give you a turkey on Thanksgiving.
Anyway, so I think
they're doing it to Muslims also. They just peel enough, But I remember I want to ask this with our last segment. We were talking about the consistent impotence of Democrats when it comes to really catering to our community's needs. I don't know if you all remember this, but I was on your podcast right after Biden won, and we were talking about immigration reform, and there was a moment of hope in both you, Maria, and Julio. And you're like, "Oh, the Democrats now with the majority, they're going to do something," and I'm like, "Nope." They're going to punt this to 2024. And we're like,
I think
really?
This is revisionist. I want to hear the audio on this one, because I don't think we were you guys hopeful.
You guys were slightly optimistic.
He might be right. Yeah, okay. I think you're right. I think you're right, and that's because of the horrors that we had lived through. And for me, it wasn't so much a celebration of Joe Biden as it was a celebration of people voting.
Yes,
period.
Right.
And voting,
Trump ending, like Trump being
and voting not for Trump, right?
Yeah.
Yes, this is but as I've written and we've discussed, right? It's the Republicans and the Democrats that throw immigrants and immigrant policy reform, refugee policy under the bus
every time.
So I don't know if I guess I'm, I don't know if I want to say shocked, because nothing shocks me anymore, but I think I'm particularly horrified at the fact that an administration that had run on making certain promises of basic human rights and respecting American law and international law when it regards people who are refugees, that we had an idea that the basic would be returned. And then we realized, like, no, just kidding. Actually, we're not even going to go back to the basic. We're going to uphold the bullshit that was coming under Trump. We actually think it's not that bad right now. So give us some time while we figure it out. And it's a pandemic, and, they bring stuff from the South. They don't, they might be good people, but not really.
Wink, wink.
Not really.
Yeah.
So to me, that's the way I talk. I mean, my dream, the only way that I really see that this happens is if the Black Lives Matter movement intersects deeply, and integrates completely 100% with the pro-immigrant rights movement, because so many of the immigrants that are being mistreated and deported are Black. And that will then put an ultimate pressure on the system. But it's not going to come because of moderate Democrats like Joe Biden and, frankly, Kamala Harris. What a disappointment. For her to have those words come out of her mouth after Hillary Clinton said those words, basically, don't come to children. To children. Shame on them. And while we criticize, because we get Danielle, you were saying, then we criticize the Democratic Party and we're not invited back to be on the TV shows because we're like, you're just angry. And it's just like, no, we're actually trying to hold a mirror up to the worst part of this country.